This is the DRF Players Podcast. Here are your hosts, Peter Thomas Fornatel and Jonathan Kinchin.
Part 2 of the Breeders' Cup Extravaganza. It's the Matt Bernier Show with the DRF Players Podcast. If you've already listened to the first part, you already know that we're 7 races into it and we're in the middle of Saturday afternoon. If you haven't, you should go back and listen to that before we go on here. My name is Matt Bernier. You can follow me on Twitter at Bernier_Matt. You know all the deal. I'm going to spare you going through and actually telling you all the places to find this thing. First things first, though, we do need to introduce the boys from the Players Podcast, the co-hosts. We'll start off with the man, the myth, the legend, Peter Thomas Fornatel. Pete, here we are. We're 7 races in, 7 to go. How we feeling?
Feeling great, Matt. I remember we did this for the first time at Santa Anita. There was all kinds of noise in the background. We sat at a podium. For some reason, it was a video podcast, and we went through, and we've done something or other ever since for the Breeders' Cup, and we've been fortunate to give out a few winners over the years, and let's hope we can keep that good momentum going as we move into the 2018 Breeders' Cup, the home stretch now, the final 7 races on Saturday.
And the other co-host of the Players Podcast, Jonathan Kinchin. He's jet setting as is the standard move for Jonathan. He's all over the place. He's back in Texas. He'll be back here in Kentucky tomorrow night, or I say tomorrow night. We're recording this on Halloween evening. JK, are you settled in a little bit now? I know you've only been home for about 45 minutes. You feeling good?
Feeling good. I couldn't be feeling any better. 2014, I turned on Esquire TV and saw this young strapping man and thought to myself, golly, that guy's super cool. I wish I could do what he's doing and play in contests. And now I'm 27 dinners in with the guy. I've done 17 podcasts with him. He's moderated my some things for me, for some panels for me to question. I mean, it can't get any better. I'm hanging out with Matt Bernier.
He hosts your darn TV show.
And you're the best contest player in the world. How about that? It's amazing.
If I'm the best, it's only because you don't play anymore.
Stop. No, I do play. The problem is I just don't play well anymore. That's the big problem.
Somewhere Tommy Massis is gnashing his teeth.
Oh, I mean, if Tommy hears this, there's going to be phone calls and texts sent out.
Did you guys see Tommy's tweet today?
Which one?
I tweeted we were on Bic today with Jake Ballas, myself, Pete, and Marshall Graham, and I said I put like the Prince of Keeneland, and Tommy said, "Prince ? I have a kid."
Tommy Massis, if you're unfamiliar with him, Tommy is as good a live money contest player as you'll find. He is also just character is probably a good way of putting it, right?
Character is absolutely appropriate. He would accept character.
He would accept character.
Yeah.
That's good. I haven't seen Tommy in a while. I got to get back up to Woodbine at some point. Anyway, so here we are. We're 7 races in. Again, if you haven't heard the first 7 races, head on over to the DRF Players Podcast. You can listen to that. At the end of this, we will also go over some prop bets, some of the new head-to-heads that the Breeders' Cup is unveiling for the 2018 Breeders' Cup. I'll probably just send that over to Pete or Jonathan if one of those guys can fire away because they have them all pulled up right in front of them. I'm going to discuss those briefly on betting the Breeders' Cup, a little bit of self-promotion, whatever you'd like to call it. That'll be out on Thursday evening, and it'll air twice on Friday, both times on NBCSN. Edzo and I will chop those up a little bit, and then we'll lead into some coverage on Friday. But without further ado, let's keep this thing rolling along. Race number 5, that's going to be the first one that we kick off here on the Matt Bernier Show, the DRF Players Podcast, the joint production, Part 2. We'll just keep calling it Part 2. It's the 5th race, the 1 mile, 1 turn Breeders' Cup Dirt Mile. Before we go into picks, Pete, I know you and I we have discussed this a few different times. How I'm very I don't want to say a fan, but I'm open to the dirt mile, and I know you're not particularly high on it. You're not very fond of it. Thoughts on this year getting back to a 1-turn mile? Does it make it any more? Can you swallow it this time around?
I do think it makes it more palatable. I think it makes it more palatable in a year where you have a real showdown happening between horses. I still think if you think about dispersing these this race into two other races, the Sprint and the Classic. You have more interesting races there. I still think my long-held position that it's not a needed race has some merit, but I'm also not the type to bang my head against the wall. It kind of is what it is. The industry has embraced the race, and I'm certainly not going to cut off my nose to spite my face and not bet it or talk about it because of my my not loving it.
How fun would it be, though, if City of Light and Catalina Cruiser were in the Classic, if Firenze Fire, Seven Trumpets, Awesome Slew were in the Sprint? I'm okay. I love it a lot more like you, Pete, when it's at one turn. But it would be interesting the other way.
I think some people on Twitter kind of made Pete's point, though, when pre-entries were out and I want to say 80% of the field was cross-entered in different races.
Exactly. That
in and of itself, doesn't that indicate that this is not necessarily the upper echelon of the Breeders' Cup weekend? I mean, you could make an argument now that the juvenile turf sprint is involved. You can make the case that the dirt mile is, the 13th or 14th out of the 14 Breeders' Cup races, and that's even coming from someone that's a fan of this race. Is that crazy to say?
No, that feels about right. I mean, you certainly would put the new kid on the block behind it. Maybe I like that. I don't always like to bet the turf sprint. I like it as a race, but I wouldn't argue with anybody who wanted to put that back in the pecking order. But, pretty much those would be the ones that would leap to mind if I were ranking my favorites that I think you could make a case should go behind it. It's kind of redundant.
Well, as far as the little contest that we're doing, again, those of you that listened last year, you're familiar with the format. We went through, we sort of rotate on each race. We pick a horse, we get that horse. Ultimately, it's a win-place sort of pari-mutuel situation. At the end of the 2 days, whoever has the highest total ends up winning. I think we've come to the agreement that the loser still gets a punishment, but the winner will have the losers donate $50 to $100 from each side and in their name to whichever charity of their choice. That sounds about right, yes?
I like that idea.
Okay. And at this point, who picked first in the turf sprint? Do we recall?
It was me, wasn't it? Because it was the one I struggled. Didn't I struggle with coming up with a first pick there before ultimately settling on?
You said it was almost a punishment that you had to pick first. I believe that was what it was. So that would lead Jonathan Kinchin to be batting leadoff here for this race. You pick first, JK, in the dirt mile. Where are you going?
I wish that he didn't draw down in there, but I can't pick another horse. I got to go with City of Light. And look, the thing with City of Light is I've always just been a big fan of the horse. Well, I wasn't a fan of the horse when he broke his maiden because I didn't have him that day. But I've been a fan of him every day since that. His run in the Oaklawn Handicap, the Triple Bin, the Malibu, and his unfortunate finish in the Forego, while being extremely wide and Whitmore slipping up the rail. Horse couldn't be doing any better. I've hinted to hanging out with some trainers this weekend, and one who's been extremely welcoming was Mike McCarthy, and just watching him operate and watching what he's doing and hearing him talk about the horse. And the horse just lays around and sleeps all day. He's super smart. He takes care of himself. Like I said, I wish he didn't draw inside. But from a straight, purely handicapping standpoint, if I had no connection to the situation, I would almost be okay with it because I know that he's going to, there's not going to be any funny business. He's going to send him out of there, and he's going to be put in a position. He's going to be in the one path all the way around there. He's going to save ground. He's a big lumbering thing. And if he's good enough, he'll win. So I'm going to go with City of Light. And the interesting horse that I'm going to take a look at is a horse I've faded all year this year, but for some reason I'm going to use a little bit, and that's Awesome Slew.
Interesting. Awesome Slew getting back to his home track here at Churchill Downs. I suppose that puts me second right now at this point. And, coming into it, I've been a fan of Catalina Cruiser all year. I think from a raw ability standpoint, he's as talented a horse as we have right now, and he's only raced 4 times. But I've long maintained that, and it's not just this horse, it's any horse at this point. When you go out there and you get cushy trip after cushy trip, you can go out there and do your best. It's one thing when you do that. It's another thing when you're able to overcome some adversity or you get into a bit of a fight with someone and you're still able to go on and put up gaudy numbers and put on very, very impressive performances. I anticipated Catalina Cruiser to have to do that on Saturday. I still think there's a scenario where he might. But boy, that outside draw, I think, is the absolute ideal situation for Drayden Van Dyke. I think they break. If a horse like Trigger Warning wants to go to the lead, so be it. If City of Light somehow clears off to the lead, I think they're going to be just fine sitting just off the flank and trying to take their chances. And if neither of them go, I think Catalina Cruiser just cruises right off to the front and then says, come and catch me. And at that point, I think he could put on a bit of a show. The John Sadler number doesn't bother me. The Outside of California number doesn't bother me. I hate to do it, but I just think he's the best horse in the race, so I'm going to go with Catalina Cruiser.
It's logical.
Pete, where do you go?
Yeah, if you didn't do it, I would have. I see the case for Awesome Slew. That was not a great rail that he was running on, in my opinion, last time in the ACAC. But I'm going to go with another horse who I thought spent some time on a rail that I didn't think was good, the rail at Parks back on September 22nd. This was the horse I mentioned on Steve Bick today as a potential long shot, and he just laughed at me, I guess, about how much steam he'd heard about this horse and how he didn't think it was fair to call this one a long shot. But, hey, for the contest, it doesn't matter. I can just pick a horse that I think is going to outrun his odds, and for me, it's going to be Seven Trumpets. I respect the favorites that you guys both pick, but I do think from a wagering strategy point of view, for me, the right move here might be to reach for something a little more of a price. I'm going to go with Seven Trumpets in the Breeders' Cup Dirt Mile.
Now, as we did on the Players Podcast, we can do it here after we give out our picks. If there's anything interesting or some alternatives that we want to throw out at bigger prices, obviously we are going to do so for anybody listening and just for our own sake, just because I want to hear what these guys have to say and vice versa. I'm also going to kind of button along those sort of same lines with you, Pete, coming from Parks. I'm probably in a vast minority here. I think Trigger Warning's a good horse. I just don't think he's been running at the right distance. I think he's been a horse that wants to go shorter. I don't know that he's this good, but at a giant price, I wouldn't throw him out underneath. I don't know if he can win this race, but I am certainly going to use him somewhere underneath the favorites in here. Is that totally in left field?
No, it's not crazy to me.
Be fair. Be real. Be real.
I'm being real. I think what's interesting here is that the game is so different when you're talking about a horse who's been running at 1 1/8 and 1 1/4, cutting back to a one-turn mile, who's got natural speed, and is going to be a massive price. So I just see no reason he's not a horse that I would have put on my short list initially. I didn't really see that before you mentioned it. But, when people you respect come up with things that are creative at prices, there's no equity in opposing it. JK, what are your thoughts?
I mean, he's won what? His last 3 wins were on the synthetic at Presque Isle. You wanted an allowance race at Sunland and a stake at Sunland. So, another allowance race at Sunland. Look, I think his involvement in here is potential to ruin the race for City of Light and or Catalina Cruiser. I just think that's like his only involvement here. I don't think that he's got a shot. I think I'm not disagreeing with your idea that he needs to run shorter, Matt. I'm just saying this ain't the spot to figure it out.
That's fair. Totally fair. And then look, on paper, you can totally that makes more sense than anything. This is just a horse that I've had earmarked since the Ohio Derby, saying that he needs to go shorter. And you're right, maybe this isn't the spot for him, but I do think he's at least getting back to doing what he wants in a spot like this. And at 50 to 1, I'm certainly going to use him underneath in some variation.
Absolutely. I mean, but he's the typical horse. When Your Beautiful Mug goes off the TV and then they show the prices on NBC, it's like Trigger Warning ran 4th in the Super and was 65 to 1. He's the perfect horse for that scenario.
That's I got to be honest. That's all I'm hoping for on Saturday afternoon. Let's move on to the 6th race. That is the Filly and Mare Turf. This is an interesting race simply because it's 1 3/8. We get back to the more traditional distance. Last year they went 1 1/8 out at Del Mar for obvious reasons with the turf course. But the real interesting thing about this race is it's Chad versus everyone. There are 14 horses in there. Chad has 5 of them. This is probably going to be contested on, I would say, at the absolute best, and this is a long shot. The absolute best, good going. I'm going to lean closer to yielding, if not outright soft, but it remains to be seen. Sounds like a ton of rain is going to come through here. Correct me if I'm wrong. I believe I go first here.
This is you.
Look, this is a race that it's not that I love her, particularly because of the draw, which may sound a little bit silly because she's down on the inside. But to me, of all of Chad's horses, I feel like 4-Star Crook is the one that, with her turn of foot, is actually going to appreciate this distance a little bit more than a Sister Charlie, or certainly a horse like a Raving Beauty. Santa Monica might actually want the trip more than any of them, but I just don't think she's as good as these horses. 4-Star Crook has gone from being that lovable New York bred to being a legitimate grade 1 caliber mare at this point as a 5-year-old. And I love that she wins races. She's, 12 of 19 lifetime. There's not a ton of speed in this race, so that's a little bit of a concern, but I'm not worried about the surface. I think she'll be able to handle it. She's 5-1 on the morning line. I think that's probably where she ends up, 5-6-1. I will take 4-Star Crook here. Pete, where are you going to go?
I'm going to keep it simple, and I keep saying this. When you look back at horses who've won this race, and you just sort of look at their form and the types of races they've run in, Wild Illusion's form just looks like a filly and mare turf winner to me. The huge, big wins in big Group 1 races. A little bit of drama this morning when she briefly dumped the rider and almost got away. But the rider got back up subsequently, and they galloped around there, and she took the bit nicely. And I think it was just a question of her feeling full of herself as opposed to having any issues. She's my top choice in the race. I think the price is going to be square enough relative to her quality. It's Wild Illusion for me, hopefully, to overcome the squadron of Chad Brown horses.
JK?
You got Steve, Matt. You get all the bells and whistles with the DRF Players Podcast. You got the mute button. I think all the Chads are live. I actually do like 4-Star Crook quite a bit, but I'm going to stick with my. It's a pre-theory, right? It's not a. I'm not going to go to my grave with it. If it shows to be a little bit different on the weekend, I'll change it up. But the inside is not good when it rains at Churchill Downs on the turf course. It hasn't been. It wasn't last year. It hasn't been in the years that I've been to the Derby. It's just not the place you want to be. The outside is. So I have to fade, not fade fully because I think she's just that good. I'll use her still. 4-Star Crook. Sister Charlie's usable. Raving Beauty's usable, especially if she's forwardly placed. I am not going to forget about Santa Monica. I think that this filly mare has run well on good ground. She's run well at this distance. Like you mentioned, Matt, I think she's probably the one that wants the mile in 3/8. Maybe Sister Charlie, but she's second, I think, for wanting that. I think a Raving Beauty probably wasn't good enough to go in the mile, so they popped her in this race. 4-Star Crook, the same situation. So the 3/8 for Santa Monica, who's run well in those races, or the 1.5 miles as well. She's run well with a little bit of cut. She's got Jose. She's drawn outside. She's going to get that kind of outside trip on the good part of the grass, and she's probably going to be 15-1, like the morning line says. She's gonna be forgotten with Wild Illusion and the rest of the Chads taking money. I'm gonna go with Santa Monica here. My price horse is paid, and I'm telling you right now, I know you guys are like, it's a Mike McCarthy thing. Mike told me he likes her. I don't see it, but he thinks she's gonna love the distance. She's 20-1, so pop her in underneath.
Pete, where do you stand on Magic Wand in here?
I put her up for this race right after Royal Ascot, thinking we were going to be dealing with firm ground. But she's just another one of these, and a bunch of them go out for the O'Brien team, where I'm just too concerned about the ground. Would be a backup for me at best. I keep mentioning my friend Kevin Blake and some of his very clever ideas in the Final Furlong podcast. And I'm not even giving away the store with the ones we've talked about. He had plenty of gold, and folks should definitely check out Final Furlong podcast, produced in association with At the Races. But he made a very compelling case for Aziria. Oh my gosh. It's Alcibiades all over again. I'm so tired, Matt. I'll let you say it for me.
Azira,
yes. Dermot Weld, the Aga Khan, some really rock-solid form lines in here, and a horse who could get absolutely forgotten and ignored. And just one that, in that same way J.K. was talking about, one to include underneath or in your deeper horizontal spreads. I'm a little bit interested.
Let's move on to the main track again, huh? Race number 7, it's the Breeders' Cup Sprint. In my opinion, this is the best race of the weekend. I know I may be, again, in a little bit of an island here, but from top to bottom, I think this has the most competitive field of quality. You can make the case for other races that are as competitive, or maybe even some that are slightly more. That's your opinion. To me, this one has the best horses, the deepest field in here. May not be a large field, but I think it's a deep field. I believe Jonathan. No,
I think
Pete,
it's back to me.
Lead off here?
Yeah, I think it's back to me. And another race where I don't love going first, because I think, as live as the two favorites are and as cool of a classic East versus West clash as the two favorites make this race, I'm just going to stick with the horse that I've been picking ever since the waning moments of the Phoenix Stakes at Keeneland. I'm a Limousine Liberal fan. I've long been a fan of this horse, has produced pod winners and in real life winners in the past. The trouble last time was obvious. But I think what I really like is the way the pace could potentially set up and just the fantastic record at Churchill Downs. This is his backyard. The early prices in the UK were fantastic. Kudos if you were able to, one of our UK or Irish listeners who were able to get on at those kind of numbers. I don't know what price the horse is going to be on the day, so I could be, under 6-1 or something. We'd be getting into underlay territory. 8 or 10-1, I'd be much happier with this pick. Limousine Liberal for me in the Breeders' Cup Sprint.
Pete, I'll tell you what, and real quick to interrupt Jonathan, I love Limousine Liberal as well, but I have seen everyone and their brother talking about this horse.
So no way we're going to get that price?
I mean, I suppose it's possible just because there's going to be, it's the Breeders' Cup and anything can happen. But I feel like if this was just a random Saturday at Belmont, you're looking at 4-1, which I agree with you. To me, that's just far too short considering the class and quality of the other runners. Jonathan, where are you going to go in here?
This morning, Steve Bick asked me who horses I was fading, when we were on the show. And that's when he was making fun of Pete for picking a West Point horse as a long shot. I said Limousine Liberal, not because I don't think he's good, not because I don't respect him, and it's not even so much that I'm fading him. I will use him. But you're right, Matt. He is going to be crushed at the windows because everyone saw that trip. And not only did they see that trip, everyone saw in the gallop out when Jose threw down his goggles and showing just so much frustration for the ride that he got. That he gave on a horse that he thought he was probably meant to win with. So I think he's just to be overbet. I love Imperial Hint. I think he's going to be very, very short. I would be very happy with just having Imperial Hint and Roy H. In the first leg of the pick 5 here as my 2 A horses. And I actually think I would probably fade Limousine Liberal as a B. I like the horse, but I would probably just go with Promises Fulfilled in case he's just freaky like he could possibly be. He could be improving. But I'm going to go with Roy H as my pick. I think Roy H is he ran well last time. I tried to beat him with Ransom the Moon. He ran a 1:15 time for him last time off of a 70-day break, and that number kind of fits in to a certain extent with what he's been doing in the past. I think he's back coming the right direction. Paco. Obviously, we got to make those T-shirts will be forwardly placed. That's not going to be an issue. I think he'll sit right off of Imperial Hint and or Promises Fulfilled and do what he did last year and run by Imperial Hint. I'm going to go with Roy H.
So yeah, I mean, I picked Limousine Liberal, but my second choice in the horse, I love him. I think the best sprinter in the country when he runs his best race is Imperial Hint. Now I'm going to go with him in this spot, but admittedly, I've been saying it for weeks now. I'm not totally convinced he got what he needed out of that Vosburg. Now, maybe I'll look like a fool Saturday night or right after this race is run, but it's eerily reminiscent for me to his prep leading into the Churchill Downs at Churchill Downs on Derby Day, where you can say what you want, say it was Churchill Downs or say it was the wet track. Well, Churchill, I'm not totally convinced that's the case. The wet track doesn't hold any water for me, no pun intended, just because he was 3 for 3 going into it on a wet track, so that doesn't work. To me, it was more a matter of that run at Tampa Bay off the long layoff. He just cruised out there. He looked very much like he did in the Vosburg. He destroyed an inferior group, and I just am not totally convinced that he got enough out of that leading into the biggest race of his life here on Saturday. I think at his best, he's better than anyone else. I always kind of that to me, that's ultimately the barometer of sort of greatness. I'm not saying that he fits in there as far as greatness is concerned, but I'm just saying how good is your good? And I think his good is better than anyone else's good. I would be lying if I said I wasn't concerned. Maybe I'm one of the few that's feeling this way, but I'm terrified that he didn't get enough out of that Vosberg in order to be 100% ready to go for this spot here. Having said that, he will be my pick kind of by default as the third choice in here.
This is not a disparaging question. It's just an honest question. If Bob Baffert trained Imperial Hint, would you be more inclined or less inclined to use?
Oh, no. It's not a matter. I mean, I don't think it would be any more or less. To me, he's strictly the horse to beat. I'm going to be using him in everything. I just mean as far as from a win standpoint, at the price that he's likely to be, I don't know that he is fully ready to go. And even if let's say instead of Carvajal it was Baffert, I'd be saying the exact same thing. But like I said, maybe I'll look silly Saturday night after he goes off and wins by 5, like he has basically all year. But I just
the thing. He looked good working in the morning. He's kind of an aggressive little guy. He's all over the place, running all over the place. But someone else said he's probably the smallest horse in the Breeders' Cup. Were you with me, Pete, when we heard that?
Somebody said that. I mean, I think there was some hyperbole there, but he does have that pocket rocket kind of shape. I take Matt's point about maybe for a sprinter in a tough race like this having an easy prep. I mean, I think about it and relating it to like a human runner. It's as much as they do in the morning, and this is true for certain barns more than others, right? You get so much more out of your work in the afternoon than you do they can say that a race can be like 4 workouts in terms of the fitness and how it brings a horse along. And just like a human runner could be short for an important race or physical test if they don't train hard enough. I'm aware of that fear that Matt has, and I think it's right. As for the specifics, though, of that Churchill race on Derby weekend, I just thought it was too far. I thought the horse ran I agree with you that it wasn't the wet. I thought the horse ran really well for about 6 furlongs. I don't know what to do with the horse. I mean, I think I have to put him down as a defensive use if you made me pick, but I'm not excited about betting him. He's really a conundrum as far as I'm concerned.
Anybody else that we need to touch on? Anybody that's at a bit of a longer price that we may be interested in here?
I mean, I think you probably have to at least we should at least mention Whitmore. Look, I mean. He got a dream trip, and he got a dream trip when he won the Forgo, and the other races he runs, and he gets out like he's trying to go home. I just don't trust him. I think he needs a setup in a perfect situation. I'm not really interested. Promise Fields had some freaky races, mixed reviews from his work. I've heard it wasn't good. I heard it was good. So take that for what it is. And then
I'll
I
make
guess
my annual public service announcement about the dirt sprint and how it seems like every year horses I've heard poor things about how they were working seem to win this race, and this is going back years. I wouldn't let that put you off if you want to play the speed and you like Promises Fulfilled.
And I feel like I probably have to say, because I make fun of the horse all the time and he always runs okay, is like Warriors Club. Like, how cool would it be if the Churchill Downs Racing Club got a win at the Breeders' Cup at Churchill? He's a game little thing. I joke about him never having a shot, but he's run well in some spots. So I think he's an underneath type, he's one of those horses where it feels like there could be a situation where it's like take back, make one run, and those horses hit the board more often than not when they're not trying to actually like win the race.
Did Gary Palmisano promise to get you a boozy milkshake for saying that?
No, he didn't. Gary, I saw Gary quite a bit this weekend, but he didn't say anything about a bougie milkshake. But I'll pick the horse if he gives me a milkshake.
Let's turn the page to the late pick 4 on Saturday afternoon. I say it's the late pick 4. It's the late pick 4 as far as Breeders' Cup races are concerned. The 8th race, it's the Breeders' Cup Mile. I've heard numerous people say that this is the most inscrutable of all the Breeders' Cup races because the Europeans coming over here may not be the vintage sort of Euros that we're accustomed to seeing. The American contingent has a number of questions. I believe Jonathan bets leadoff. I'm going to be fascinated to see where he goes.
I mean, I make fun of people all the time for the all button. I honestly wouldn't. I would feel guilty telling someone they made a mistake by doing that. This race is very, very difficult. I wanted Oscar Performance to run in the mile. The mile and a half race. I thought that would be interesting. I wanted to bet Almanar last time, and Almanar kind of let me down in that spot. This actually feels like the race where I'm going to actually see Analyze It sent very aggressively to the front in a mile race with an opportunity to kind of go on with it. In the last race, he had to deal with Heart to Heart, and I'm going to go blank, of course, because I can't remember the horse's name because he's not that good.
Voodoo Song
was in where, he was never going to find, kind of get to that spot, get to that lead he ranged up. I think this might be the spot where he does get there. So I'm going to go with Analyze It. With the disclaimer that I want to use about 184 other horses, and my reasoning for picking Analyze It that he's finally going to make the lead in a mile race.
All right, now I'm not just saying this. Obviously, you guys happen to be doing this with me, doing the joint podcast, and the timing of this is fantastic. I've had a horse earmarked for this race for about 6 months, and he needed a little bit of help earlier this week to even get into the race. But it's timely enough that Jonathan is here. Is it crazy? And he's got a brutal post position. But when I look at this race top to bottom, and I see Divisadero come into it, obviously he scratched at the gate for the Shadwell. But the Woodbine Mile, there was no pace for him to run at. The 4-star Dave, I think he moved into the teeth of the pace, and I don't think it was an offensive race. It wasn't great, but it wasn't terrible. And then you go back to that Arlington handicap, he won that. And the Wise Dan, there was no pace, and he made a big move. I have a feeling that he's better. It doesn't look great on paper, but I think there's more there than maybe meets the eye, and he's back to his favorite and preferred surface. On the betting show that we're taping on Thursday, we have to give a lock, a value pick, and an Arkong pick is 100 million to one shot. My Arkong pick is Divisadero. I picked him in the paper. Jonathan, am I barking up the wrong tree?
I feel like I can eloquently speak about why this horse has a really good shot of winning. The same way you pointed out, and I'm not going to repeat all of them. He hasn't really run a bad race this year. Like, he really just hasn't. The only negative that I can give is that I wish that he just didn't get taken from Buff just from like a vibe standpoint. But he loves Churchill. He's never run at Churchill when it's like what Churchill's turf is going to be like. But he clearly, from a geometry standpoint, something about the turf course fits what he wants to do. Something about the banking of the turns he runs well on. He finishes down the lane. It's just there's a lot of things, I think, from a geometry standpoint that fit him. I worry a little bit about the ground, however, and I worry about the pace because obviously I picked a horse that I thought could wire the field. He's an A horse for me from a sentimental standpoint, but also it makes sense. He's not run a bad race, and he could absolutely pick them up. When they turn for home and there's 3 horses that you don't know that are on the front, why can't he come swooping 5 wide and win at a racetrack that he's 3 for 4 at? I don't see any issue with it.
The mile's
Pete, where are you going to go in here?
It's probably a little sharp, the mile for Divisadero, but after I was shamed about mentioning 7 Trumpets as a long shot pick, my backup long shot pick was Divisadero. I was thinking more for 3rd and 4th and widest of spreads, a little bit for second type of situation, but I don't think it's crazy. I'm glad you guys have left me the one horse in the race that I can really build a legitimate case for, and that's Polydream. Only question about her is going to be the price. Obvious that trip in the foray was ridiculous. The previous form is excellent. I also love that we're looking at a horse, unlike so many of the other Euros in here, who this race has been on the docket and in the plans for a much longer time, given the Connections history of incredible success in the race. It's a little boring. She might be a little too short overseas. Maybe in the tote, the inscrutability of it all means we can get 9-2 on Polydream. I'm happy to go with her.
It would be cool to see those silks in the winner's circle for this race, wouldn't it?
Wow, it's happened so many times. It'd be great to see it happen again. French have such a great record in this race. I'd love to see Polydream get it done. Again, only question is price, but with going this way or stabbing, I'll go this way for sure.
You know, we've made it clear this is a race that can go. I mean, there's 14 horses. It can be won by, I would go out on a limb and say, almost all 14 of them. Is there any one horse in this race that you think is going to be a tremendous overlay if you're just trying to project forward? Obviously, we don't know just yet, but based on what you've heard, what you've read, things of that nature, and what they've accomplished on the racetrack, is there any one horse you think is going to be a significant overlay from the price that they probably should be?
I think Catapult will probably be ignored a little bit. And I'm not crazy about the horse, but you know, he did start his career on the East Coast with Chad, and so obviously there's some concern that he has found success on the West Coast because of the firmness. But I you know, 6-1 I think is ridiculous. I mean, this horse is 15-1. You know, and you know, so I think the horse will be 15-1. So I think there's probably a case to be made. He's drawn outside. He'll avoid the inside situation that we're worried about. I thought Next Shares could be a clever horse to pick, but I'm not playing a horse that I project to sit the pocket on that turf course.
I Can Fly. I Can Fly is interesting to me. Likes the soft. And you know, has that Roaring Lion form. I mean, come on, that's probably good enough form to win this rendition of the Breeders' Cup Mile if everything goes according to plan, and the price should just be massive.
Yeah, if for some reason my trifecta hits, I might just be able to buy the racetrack because I picked I Can Fly third. I picked Gustav Klimt second. Now, I understand maybe on paper it looks like he's just a bit of a loser. He didn't like to get the job done. I can't help but notice I thought it was a scenario where he was just kind of stacked up in that most recent run in the 4A. And obviously, you know, say what you will. Maybe it was a situation where he was never going to be good enough. But I think if he had gotten clear a little bit earlier, I think it would have been a better effort than that fourth place finish. But also, to me, his two best races to date have come over heavy ground. That run 2 starts back and then also go all the way back to April at Leopardstown. So, again, maybe he's not the most likely of win contenders, but coming over here for O'Brien, and on paper, he probably looks like a bit of a nibbler, a bit of a horse that doesn't want to get over the top. I kind of feel like Gustav Klimt, maybe this is an opportunity for him as well, maybe catching some ground that he prefers in the spot like this. Let's transition over to the 9th race. Let's go on. I think it's where it belongs. I think the Breeders' Cup Distaff belongs on Saturday, not on Friday. For a number of years, they've tried to make it the headliner on Friday. This is one of the keystone races of this entire event, and I think it belongs in the late pick 4 on Saturday afternoon. Obviously, it's a mile and an eighth on the main track. Who is batting leadoff here? It's me. It's my turn. I kind of look at this race, and maybe I'm going the wrong direction. Maybe you guys agree or disagree. With the 3-year-olds, I'm not totally convinced that their best is as good as the best from Abel Tasman. Now, I realize Abel Tasman may not be at her best right now based on that Zenyatta, which was an unmitigated disaster. I still maintain if she runs something like she did 2 or 3 starts back, whether it was the Personal Lens and the Ogden Phipps, I don't think anyone else in this field can beat her. And if you believe some of the prices overseas, I'm not totally convinced that we'll get those here. Boy, I can't resist the idea of Abel Tasman, especially if I don't believe that the 3-year-olds are necessarily fast enough to run with her at her best. I'll go with Abel Tasman.
Yeah, this morning Pete called me at 6:30. We had made plans to go to the track at 7. Called me at 6:30. I was not in any condition. A couple probably had 1 too many last night.
He was still drunk, but it was about 6 too many.
Look, Abel Tasman had a bad day. It doesn't mean she's not still the people's champ, right? She just wasn't feeling good the other day. There was, Bob was on Bick and talked a little bit about how that corner of his barn all kind of came down with a little something. but it didn't show up until after the race. She's trained well enough from there. If you look at the form, what she's done, I mean, Elate would be the favorite in here, I think, if she runs at this point, based on everything that we know. If assuming Elate would have won the race that Wildcat ran, the Beldame, it enabled Tasman has beat her fair and square on a few times. I just think she's just better than everyone else in this spot. I think Monomoy Girl is just too inconsistent. There's too many question marks about her. So, Matt, I agree with you.
Wins every race is inconsistent. You got to pause on that one for a second.
Monomoy Girl?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, here's my inconsistency part of it is like I don't. Well, she's just not very pretty moving, but that throws me, and I don't even know what I'm looking at, and it throws me off. She always looks like she's laboring. I think her best distance is a mile. I thought her Acorn was probably one of her most impressive races. I think the mile and an eighth that she ran in the CCAA Oaks was good, but I think that it's Midnight Bisou doesn't want to run that far, doesn't want to go a mile and an eighth, which is another reason why I won't be using her here. I think they could take the Kentucky Oaks. I don't think Wonder Godot is that great. She ran well that day, but I don't think she's great. I'm not crazy about Monomoy Girl in the races that she's run in. In her last race, I thought she was kind of all over the place when they turned for home, and obviously one of the reasons she was disqualified. Some of that I'm sure was pilot decision, but she's not the type of 3-year-old that I want to take facing these types of horses with the lack of kind of wow. She just doesn't wow me.
Pete, fire away.
Where did JK go? He mentioned Abel Tasman, who was already taken, and then he pooped on Monomoy Girl, but he didn't give us a pick, did he?
Well, I answered your question. So I answered your question. I was going to let you come back, and then I was going to throw the horse at you that's going to win the whole darn thing and make you have to
well, there's no question about it now that you've shown this little attitude that I'm picking Monomoy Girl just so we can shove it in your face when she goes ahead and wins on Saturday. Monomoy Girl for me. She runs well every time. I think it was rider error last time more than anything else. I mean, it wasn't pretty, but a lot of good horses look really tired on that racetrack, so I'm not going to let visual handicapping come into it for me. I just think she's too good. I agree. I spoke to Liz Crow, the bloodstock agent who picked her out this morning. She agrees with you about the one-turn mile being where she's been the most impressive. She's obviously afraid of if what's going to happen if Abel Tasman runs that A-plus race. If I picked first, I probably pick Abel Tasman. But I'm going Monomoy Girl here, and I'm joking around about being upset with you, JK. I just think she's I've just liked her too much not to take her when I have an opportunity here.
Blue Prize for me is my selection. I thought the little antics in the lane.
Wait a second. So Monomoy Girl didn't impress you in the lane, but you're picking Blue Prize? Who stopped for a hot dog? I'm just trying to understand the logic here.
Well, Blue Prize. Well, because I think there's an excuse for why she did that. I think it was just she was distracted. I don't think it was anything crazy. And also, Blue Prize. She's won at Churchill 4 times.
Fair enough. I think it's 3, but 2 in the exacta, 2 more in the exacta. So I just thought it was interesting, that specific thing. I had some dissonance there, but fair enough.
Against Wonder Godot, she was jumping literally like a jump horse in the lane 2 days ago. I think she's probably a maniac.
Who's this?
Wonder Godot.
Oh, yeah. I don't know. I mean, she's got a resume, but I feel like she's one whose famous name works against her a little bit, in that I think she'll maybe be more bet than the actual form and figures suggest she should be.
Let's move on to the 10th race, the Breeders' Cup Turf, 1.5 miles, obviously on the grass. It's going to be a bit of a bog. The superstar of the weekend is running in this race, though. That's the number 2, Enable. Enable comes in for Frankie Dettori and John Gosden. She is the dual winner of the ARC. She will try to become the first horse to win the ARC in the Breeders' Cup Turf in the same year. You're going to hear that about 5 million times between now and Saturday afternoon. Pete, I believe you have the honors for this race. Are you going to go with Enable, or are you going to go elsewhere?
I'm going to go ahead and pick Enable. I just think she's better than these. I liked how she looked out on the track today. They didn't let her go very fast, but when she got up to speed quickly, I thought she was moving very well over the ground. I've talked at great length about how I think the arc stat is noise, not signal. And even if you think it's signal, I think you have to put Enable in a different category. She's just the best of these. I mean, you never know. We've certainly seen well-fancied horses come over here and not show their form. And I have the price on this one. It's so hard for me. I could see a world in which she's 1-2. I could see a world in which she's even money. In my betting, I'm going to react accordingly. For the purposes of our game, though, I'll try to take these points late on that could prove critical. Enable for me, and boy, it's going to be fun to see her run. I hope she struts her stuff.
We'll touch on it a little bit at the very end when we go over those props. This could be one of the most fascinating props, the head-to-head matchups that the Breeders' Cup is offering of the entire weekend. We'll get to that in a little bit. Jonathan, where are you going to go in here?
I'm going to go with Channel Maker. I would have went with Enable. I thought Enable's gallop this morning, like I said, there's about 6 horses that I saw that I could actually tell something different was happening than the rest of them. And Enable looked amazing on the turf today, just galloping around there. And I just think that she's just better than these. It's not an impressive group. I mean, if you look at who the highlights are, it's Robert Bruce, the winner of last year's race. It's just not anything to really kind of back in that situation. And so I'm just going to go with Channel Maker. Had the really big time form U.S. figure last time, was on the lead and ran really well on a soft turf course in the Joe Hirsch. Has Jose, will be forward. So even if the inside is bad, they'll know by this point, and Jose will be forward enough and be clear enough to get off of that situation. I think Channel Maker is in my opinion the most likely winner to run, likely horse to run second or third out of all the horses in the race.
Yeah, Channel Maker, I made him my value pick as far as the betting the Breeders' Cup show is concerned on NBCSN. That'll come up on Thursday and Friday. You keep going back and looking at it. I couldn't find any real faults in that Turf Classic, and then you factor in the soft ground that he's likely to get on again on Saturday with that newfound early tactical speed that he brings to the table. I keep going back to it. That Turf Classic, his effort there reminds me very much of Beach Patrol's last year, and I understand, it's not apples to apples, but both of those races came over ground with some cut in it. They both earned high 100 buyers. And they both came from horses that had never been killers. They had never gone out there and smashed your face in, where all of a sudden in that race, Channel Maker wins by almost 5 lengths. Beach Patrol won by 100 in that race, and all he did was come back and barely lose, and probably ran too well to lose.
He ran
in last year's Breeders' Cup turf. We'll find out. I agree. I picked Channel Maker in here. I picked Enable second, so that leaves me to my third choice in this spot. I mean, look, the Europeans have done very, very well in this race. It's been well documented. You'll hear that more and more. You guys may know more about this than I will, just simply because I'm at the point now where I don't pay much attention to the morning stuff. But I haven't heard great things about Waldgeist to this point. But at the end of the day, I thought he ran better than it may look in the arc. I didn't think he had the cleanest of trips. It wasn't a disaster by any stretch, but I thought he was in a little bit tight at the top of the lane when they turned for home, and then he did weave his way through traffic, and I thought he finished quite well. I don't think this ground is going to be a problem for him. You see that he won that Group 1 at Saint-Cloud 3 starts back. I guess by default, I'll go to my third choice in here, Waldgeist. I'm curious your thoughts, though. Again, you guys have been checking some things out in the morning. Is the sort of chatter about him not loving life, is that accurate or no?
I clapped eyes on him once. I haven't seen him every day, but the one time I saw him in the flesh, I thought he looked well. I didn't really hear that. It makes me curious to check it out and see if that's a quirk that he's shown before. But based on my reckoning, I thought the horse looked fine. I think he's a very, very logical alternative. He's run some good races. I definitely think you're onto something about him having had some subtle trouble in the arc and having run pretty well at the end of the day. And then, I'll mention Magical as well, just because I feel like I've seen this movie before with Golden Horn and Found a couple of years ago with Magical's form coming in. There are some similarities, and is another who, if I were going to play some backups, For me, while I respect Channel Maker, and I think you guys both make good points, what I had initially been thinking was 80% Enable and then just the rest Waldgeist and Magical, and that's pending doing a little bit more research on how Waldgeist is adjusting to conditions here. Maybe I'll write about that in the At the Races blog tomorrow, or I'll send a tweet and copy you guys if there's anything interesting about that I hear.
JK, is there any scenario where we get a replay of the Sword Dancer or the Bowling Green where Glorious Empire just goes out there and he doesn't stop?
No, I think that those situations happen when the riders say to themselves at the 3/8 pole, that one's going to come back to me. And I think now that the Glorious Empire's in this race, and he's kind of shown that no, maybe he won't come back to me. I don't think that mistake will be had again. And a world in which Enable running backwards doesn't beat Glorious Empire is a world I don't want to live in.
One other horse that we have to touch on before we move on to the big one, the Breeders' Cup Classic, we have to talk about last year's winner, Talismanic. He's buried down on the inside, which Jonathan has made clear, probably not an ideal spot to be in on a turf course at Churchill Downs that takes significant water, but at the same time, he's run well over good to soft ground in the past. He may not be coming into this in fantastic form on the heels of that arc. Pete and JK, any chance for a repeat?
I'm going to save my entire bankroll until he runs. I'm going to bet it all on him. I'm going to win the BCBC.
Wow. I didn't think that would be introduced on my podcast.
There's a lot of sarcasm there. Pete's laughing for the sarcasm. Please, no one do that. I'm 100% kidding. He's got no shot.
I like the cow face more than anybody, but, it's a tougher group than last year. He was probably third best last year when I and some others were very fortunate that he was able to get to the wire first, and he's in worse form. I absolutely cannot see it.
Fellas, let's move on to the big one. It's the Grade 1 Breeders' Cup Classic, 1.25 miles on the main track, $6 million is the purse. This is, look, you can go, to me it feels like this is a race where you either believe in the horses like Accelerate and West Coast and you think that they're going to get back to their best form, or you're looking elsewhere, and elsewhere can be the 3-year-old McKinsey. Elsewhere can be Mind Your Biscuits. It can be Thunder Snow. It can be Mendelssohn. It can be Roaring Lion, the entire sort of question mark unknown in this race. Who's going first in here? Is it Jonathan?
Did I get the first pick in the Classic?
How did that work out?
Pete, did you go first last time?
I think
you took Enable, correct?
Yeah, I did. I got Enable. So JK gets to go first, but I'm playing under protest now.
JK, fire away.
From a contest standpoint, this horse will not be my selection because I think he's going to go off favored. But he is, in my opinion, the most likely winner. I will make another selection for the contest. But I think McKinsey, he ran a 120. Let's see. Let me pull it right here. I don't want to lie. He ran a 125 back in March as a 3-year-old. 196 days later, he runs a 129. There's a methodology that suggests that when you match the figure off of a long break like that, there's still improvement to be had. I think McKinsey's going to find that improvement. I think he's going to be the favorite because Accelerate drew outside, because Catalina Cruiser and Celicourt are going to be running up the track, and people are going to jump off of the John Sadler. Not off, but they're going to pile on, I guess, with the John Sadler, negative stat. And I think McKinsey goes off favorite. I think he's the most likely winner. However, I will be using Yoshida in the contest, who has been working like a monster. He looks good. I think he'll get a great trip. He's drawn outside. He'll be able to make some decisions. We talked this morning or yesterday morning about whether it's myth or whether it's luck or coincidence of how well quote-unquote turf horses perform on the Churchill Downs main track. I don't know if it's real or not, but it sometimes happens. So Yoshida for me in the contest. McKinsey, I think, is the most likely winner.
I believe that puts me second as far as picks are concerned. This was an instance where I feel like if you get the best out of Accelerator, you get the best out of West Coast, they're very likely win contenders, but I'm not totally sold on that awesome again. You look at McKinsey, I think he's going to be the favorite, or at least darn close close to it. I'm not sold on 10 furlongs with him. I keep going back to it. And again, maybe I'm just reading too much into one quote that immediately after the Pennsylvania Derby, Baffert had said, well, we'll see how he comes out of this in either the Classic or the Clark. You don't even bring up an alternative for a horse like that after a performance like that if you don't truly think that that's actually where he belongs. It just struck me as odd, especially for a guy like Baffert. I'm going to end up going with, in my opinion, the most consistent horse in the race. Maybe he doesn't want 10 furlongs, but the way that he finished in the Lucas Classic, at least to me, gives me the impression that it's not going to be a problem for him. I think Mind Your Biscuits will run his race on Saturday. Whether or not it's good enough to win, we'll find out. But he's the one in here that I feel like you're very unlikely to get just a complete no-show from him. I think he'll show up. Maybe it's only good enough for fourth. Maybe it's good enough for third. Maybe it's good enough to win. Who knows? But I feel relatively confident that he's going to show up and run his race, and we'll just find out and see where the chips fall. I will go with Mind Your Biscuits. I'm picking him in the Classic. Pete, where are you going?
Well, I just want to underline how much I like the case you make for Biscuits, and I love the point you make about sort of the horse that's most likely to show form and be somewhere. You know, if that super high five carryover rolls as it's probably expected to the Classic, Mind Your Biscuits is a kind of horse that I could definitely see trying to build some things around and saying he's got to finish in one of those top spots. I am also a Yoshida fan. I like the way McKenzie looked in the flesh. I'm very happy, though, to be able to have Catholic Boy as my pick in here. The Travers was awesome. I thought Mendelssohn really franked the form, coming back to run so well in the Jockey Club Gold Cup. Even though he didn't win, it was just such an ambitious race. Catholic Boy walked him in the Travers. I thought he looked very good the other day. I think he could get a very nice trip. He's just a horse I like a lot, who I think is going to be a square price. And while I'm not wildly against the horses at the top of the market, I just don't really like any of them at the prices that they're going to be. I'll probably, in real life, double win bet Catholic Boy and Yoshida and save with them under some other horses to try to catch something. But very happy to have Catholic Boy in the contest, and I'll definitely have some money on his nose.
Two things, Matt, for you and Pete. First one is it's just a statement. Mind Your Biscuits is the type of horse that 5-10 years from now, hanging out, young guy asks me, who's the best horse you've ever seen run? I'll say all the obvious ones: Arrogate, American Pharaoh, Justify, Rachel Alexandra, Zenyatta. But then when I'm like going for that really like wise guy pick to kind of like make you look like an insider, I'd say like this Mind Your Biscuits though. He was kind of a freak, and I think that this is the race that could really elevate him to being one of the greatest horses we've ever seen. Being able to win a Grade 1 going 6th, the Golden Shaheen, and then to come back and win the Breeders' Cup Classic, a very, very impressive opportunity for this horse, and I completely agree with you there. I did want to ask you guys, because I'm very curious, and I think a lot of people that listen to our shows are probably curious too. Last leg, pick 4. A's and B's, how are you laying it out? If neither, I know I just threw the question at you, so I'll go first. For me, my A horses in this race would be McKenzie, Mendelssohn, Yoshida, and Mind Your Biscuits. My B horses would be Catholic Boy, Gunnevera, and that's it. I wouldn't use. I'm completely fading Accelerate.
Pete?
We're not too dissimilar. I like the wise guy pick on Gunnevera so wide last time, and the form of that race has worked out so well with 4 next out graded stakes winners. I like the idea of having that horse as sort of what you might call a value B. The top of my ticket would probably be Yoshida, Catholic Boy, Biscuits, and then I don't know what to do with with Mendelssohn. And then depending, I mean, if I have some bigger prices along the way, I'm not going to cut off my nose to spite my face when I think McKinsey's a likely winner. But the horses that I want to get paid if they win in the Classic are in that group I just mentioned. I guess that group of about 5 or 6. How do you see it, Matt?
It's at some point. I've brought this up whenever we've had to do ticket maker videos or anything else like that, or just talking about putting bets together. At some point, you got to stop. You can't continue on and go too deep. I mean, look, I could list off 7 or 8 different horses that I'd like to use, even including backups. But I kind of look at it more and more, and I think, I would limit it to 2As and 2Bs. And this is I'm just sort of speaking out loud, but I'm also curious what your thoughts are. You ever been into a race or looking at a race where you look at a horse and you go, I don't want to pick him, but he's probably just going to win. And based on everything I've heard, people talking and the connections and X, Y, and Z, I do wonder if McKinsey's just going to win this race. I wonder if he just might be the best horse in the race, period. He's one of the A's. Obviously, Mind Your Biscuits is the other A, the horse that I'm actually picking in the race. And like I said, maybe I'm just being stubborn with McKinsey. And then the 2Bs for me, my big stance for this race, I don't like the horses coming out of the Awesome again. I needed to see some kind of finish, and if they win, I'll tip my cap and say, you know what, they on paper, with the exception of that one race, they were probably the best horses going into it. And you know what, maybe shame on me for getting off because of one poor effort. And I'm not convinced outside of McKinsey that the 3-year-olds are fast enough right now. Catholic Boy is a fascinating sort of study because you look at the time form rating as opposed to the buyer. I believe the buyer could be slightly on the high side,
104,
meaning that he's going to need to run the race of his life, no question about it, in order to win a race like this, and also have some of these other horses take a step or two back. So that leads me to the 10 and the 1. So the 10 is Yoshida. More and more I look at him, I didn't love that Woodward, but at the same time, it's come back solid right now. And the way that he finished, that to me was the most impressive piece of that Woodward of any horse. He finished full of run, full of gusto, and to me, 1.25 miles is going to be right in his wheelhouse. And then one of the 2 horses that I'm curious what your thoughts are, I'm going to be using a fair amount of Thunder Snow. I realize people look at it and say he had the ideal trip in that Jockey Club Gold Cup. Keep in mind, it was a means to an end to get to this point. And I think he's a much better dirt horse than he is a turf horse. You look and see his overall body of work. He's never been out of the exacta on a fast main strip. I understand most of that was over in Dubai, and there's probably a big asterisk to go along with that. But he didn't run poorly that day, and I think there's a real scenario. I won't be stunned at all if this horse ends up winning Saturday night, where we look at it and say Thunder Snow in the same year he won the Dubai World Cup and the Breeders' Cup Classic. Wouldn't be stunned at all. I'm curious what your thoughts are on Thunder Snow and the horse breaking just to his outside, because I'm about as anti-Roaring Lion in this race as you can find. Where are you guys?
Roaring Lion, his owner picked a spot, and I love tossing those horses. So that's the quick, easy answer on Roaring Lion. Thunder Snow, man, I just can't design the race in which he wins it. It's like if it falls apart and he comes from out of it, I feel like there's 4 other horses that would win. Yoshida, Biscuits, whatever, Gunnevera, Catholic Boy. Catholic Boy's gonna be forward, but and if there's a way in which he gets loose and he's like somehow like shows speed and like going into the first turn he finds the lead, then McKinsey, West Coast, Mendelssohn, and all these in Catholic Boy are sitting right there. They're going to win too. I am not a Thunder Snow guy. It's a little bit of a preview, I think, for the head-to-head between Thunder Snow and Mendelssohn.
Yeah, I don't like the draw for Thunder Snow, and it factors into my race design. I didn't love him. Not the full-on bucking bronco routine, but definitely looking a little agitado out on the main track the other day. Again, I haven't seen him every day, but when I clapped eyes on him, I wasn't overly impressed. You make a great point. I mean, my gut was to just say if he didn't win that last today, he ain't never going to win. But you make a good point, Matt, about the long-term goal and the training cycle. It would not absolutely shock me. I'm certainly not in the business of trying to talk people off of 10-1 shots, but he's not for me. And Roaring Lion, I was trying to keep an open mind, but that's another one. Seeing out on the track today with actually broke okay away from the gate, but had kind of a high knee action, Don't think he's going to like the kickback. Not a very good draw, and just a tough group. I can't. I'm anti both of those horses.
I suppose we should probably just very quickly really just kind of hone in on Accelerate for a moment. Are we against him, or are we fading him from picks, air quotes, because of any one reason in particular, or is it just an overall sort of vibe? Either one of you.
I just think he's a grindy type that took advantage of some favorable situations. If you look through his last 3 wins and you look to see who was running behind him, it's Dr. Door, City of Light. City of Light had a bad trip that day. Not 100% sure that horse wants to go 1.25 miles. Pavel, Prime Attraction. West Coast, Isotherm, who's a turf horse. I just don't love who he's been beating. And like Pete, and I think both, and you said as well, Matt, his last race, just the number wasn't good. It wasn't visually impressive. He was kind of a jerk to load. Then he was kind of getting out a bit in the stretch. He was running against a horse that was clearly short in West Coast. I think West Coast is the type of horse that you want to try to bet off of that race, but it was so slow. Mike Maloney and I've heard say there's no trips in slow races. There's no excuses to me in slow races. And West Coast, I don't care what happened. It just wasn't a great race. And so to answer your question, I can't design the race where Accelerate doesn't go 3 or 4 wide on both turns, questioning how good he is anyways, and then he's going to overcome 3 or 4 wide on both turns. It doesn't make sense to me.
Pete?
I don't have a lot to add. I mean, I was just really super duper underwhelmed by the last race, and particularly how they came home in the last race. I'm okay having that horse beat me. I'll just be wrong, and that's fine. And but I don't need him. I'm anti-West Coast as well. I think of the horses at the top of the market, McKinsey clearly the one. JK brought up an interesting point. I mean, he had talked about it like it was already done about the other Sadler horses not running particularly well. I do think that is going to have an outsized effect, how the previous Sadler horses run to how the market reacts in this race. I do think there's a world in which McKinsey could go the favorite. Obviously, the more money Accelerate takes, the happier I am to try to take a stand against him. But I don't see him on my tickets.
Well, there you go. That's a quick look at the Breeders' Cup Classic. That wraps up the 7 races here for the second part of the joint podcast that we do every year for the Breeders' Cup. But there are still some quick ones that we should touch on. And I think, again, I'll just turn this over to Jonathan or Pete, whichever one of you have those head-to-head prop bets. We can quickly dust through those, and we'll get people out of here in a timely order. Fellas, whichever one of you has it, take it away.
JK,
Maker's Mark Filly and Mare Turf head-to-head is USA versus Europe. So this is obviously the essentially it's the Chad versus the world. I mean, who are you going to add in here that's not a Chad? Mom's on Strike, Furiously Kissed. That doesn't really count. Paved, obviously, you're gonna add on to there. So it's pretty much Chad versus the world, and I think it's an interesting one. I would definitely go with the Chad side, aka the USA side.
Yeah, I'm just not interested in that bet. I think that with the possibility of team tactics being employed, I could think I'm getting value on the European side, and then somehow the race isn't run to suit. I'd rather just stick with the couple of horses that I like on the Euro side and bet them individually. I love the head-to-head concept. This just isn't one that floats my boat.
Yeah, I agree. That one just doesn't really get my juices pumping here. I kind of feel like it's a scenario where, again, I could easily see a horse like Wild Illusion getting the job done, or even O'Brien's horse. But at the same time, do I really want to go against Chad in a big race here in the United States? No, not particularly. So to me, that's just kind of a non-starter. I'm not super interested.
The next one is the mile, same vibe, USA versus Europe. I think we all kind of agree that this is a inscrutable race, and I would imagine this one's going to stay pretty close to 50-50. I think it's going to stay right split down the middle. We'll see what happens. Maybe the Europeans will get a little bit of lean because we don't have a superstar. I guess I would go USA just because, I was born here, but I don't really know.
I'm not sure about that logic. If you want USA in that one, talk to me. Maybe we'll make a little side pot for some money for charity or for some beers later in the night. If you made me pick it, it'd be Europe. I'll look at that one. I have a feeling it might just be more efficient to go ahead and bet the one specifically that I like once again.
Yeah, I agree with Pete 100%. I mean, look, I picked Divisadero. If I had to absolutely make a pick in here, I'd probably lean Europe just because I think they might be a little bit deeper and perhaps, again, in a race that can go 15 different ways in a 14-horse field. But, yeah, that's a race where I would probably just be more content taking a shot on the horse that I like at the price.
The turf, it's Enable versus the World. This is going to be interesting. Pete, I know Marshall Graham texted both of us. We had talked about it previously. It's going to be interesting because there's going to be some interesting data that we can pull from the fact that you can essentially bet Enable to win in two different situations.
Yeah,
right.
With two different takeouts, too. And
yes.
Theoretically, this should be the place to express that Enable opinion. And it's something that I'll be taking a very long look at. Also, just a note, the first time I've ever seen in a USA betting pool where you have the opportunity to de facto lay a horse. So that's just kind of interesting, and I like that. I want to support this bet, and I will be on Enable's side unless, of course, weirdly, for some strange reason, you can get a better price on her in the pool with more takeout. That probably won't happen. They'll probably converge. You'll probably get whatever, it's a Marshall question, 20, 40 cents more on Enable in this pool than in the other pool.
Now, again, this is based on, I need to do a little bit more research on it. Is it like a Vegas prop where when you make the wager, you're locked in?
No.
Paramutual.
No.
These bets are paramutual.
When the bell pops, you're locked in.
Okay, so that changes the entire dynamic of that because it is one of those things where we had talked about it a little bit earlier in one of the trailers that, in theory, if you could sit there and you could lock in, I'm making it up 4-5 on her, there's a real scenario that could be an overlay. Maybe she goes off at 3-5, and then Pete, like you had said, you factor in the takeout. It could be even lower than that. Or on the flip side, you could end up sort of shortchanging yourself a little bit if you lock in too early. But if it waits and takes everything into account until they actually pop the gate, then certainly that changes the whole dynamic of this wager.
Yeah, for a betting nerd like some of us and most of the people that probably listen to our shows, the 2 minutes that are going to be run in the class are going to be very exciting, and they'll definitely be more exciting than this. But the 2 minutes to post with this race, looking at the tote board and looking at these odds chains, are going to be a lot of fun.
By the way, this is probably the prop that will make the sort of vast majority, I would imagine, of the handle. Based on looking at what you were just saying, looking at the tote board and comparing that to what you can get potentially in that pool. I would imagine if there is some sort of discrepancy toward the end, I'd imagine you're probably going to end up seeing an influx of money in that pool as opposed to some of these other ones at the last second,
I agree.
What price do you guys think Enable's going to be?
I think
4-5. 4-5.
Okay. Yeah, I'd be okay there. Assuming, and the fact that when you're dealing with a shipper and one who's had, some quirks in the past, the ability to get to see her in the paddock and see her walk down and see her go in the gate well, to be able to have all those things before you push the button or hand the money over to the teller. I like that, and I'm intrigued. I'm starting to think maybe I'm going to bet Enable.
I'm curious what your thoughts are. And one last thing, we'll touch on this. Are there any other props to throw out there, JK?
Yeah, there's one more.
Go ahead, throw that out.
The classic head-to-head is, and obviously I think what they were trying to accomplish here was a classic rivalry from over the pond, and that is Mendelssohn, who obviously represents Coolmore, and Thunder Snow, who represents Godolphin. So I know where I'm going to land on this one, but I'm afraid that a lot of other people will in there too, but I think it's a very interesting idea.
We'll have some disagreement here based on our previous selections.
It's not only the matchup of Godolphin and Coolmore, it's the matchup of the last place finishers of the Kentucky Derby.
That's right. The House of Horrors for both of them. I like Mendelssohn. I mean, I'd be very curious to see what this price comes back. This is another one I'm pretty interested in.
To be honest with you, I don't particularly know, because as much as I love Mendelssohn, I'm an unabashed fan of his, I'm not totally convinced that he's good enough to put it this way. Does his effort in the Jockey Club, does that put him in a better position than Thunder Snow? Now, again, neither of you are particularly fond of Thunder Snow. I just feel like if we're playing just a head-to-head sort of matchup, I wonder, does Mendelssohn, does does he pay the price for being a forwardly placed horse?
Well, who
does he fade a little bit, and does Thunder Snow come and run over the top of him?
Who had the better trip in the Jockey Club?
Well, I mean, it's no question Thunder Snow did.
Yeah, so I think a lot of people, based just on that pure fact, not considering the intelligent, angle that you've mentioned, that maybe that was a means to an end. Mendelssohn's gonna be bet off of that performance. The other thing about Mendelssohn is he's forward. So in a 1.25 mile dirt race in America, I think that you feel, well, at least in my brain, it works that way, where you feel like you're having an advantage when you're forwardly placed.
Kickback.
Well, but I guess that plays into also trying to, like, that point that I was trying to drive, is that even if you think that Mendelssohn ran a better race in the Jockey Club than Thunder Snow did, which I happen to think, I think Mendelssohn ran better than he did. The likelihood Mendelssohn's going to, you would assume, have a very similar trip to that. It's probably not going to be nearly as fast, but there's a real scenario where he's up there, he's taking heat, or he's putting pressure on someone else, and you're going to have Thunder Snow in behind those horses. And does it take too much out of Mendelssohn for that final 1/8 of a mile? And then Thunder Snow, look, maybe it's a battle for 5th, but the idea is you don't need to pick the winner. You need to pick the horse who's going to finish ahead of the other one, I
usually want the speed in a match race, and I'm worried about the kickback causing, in a bigger field, buried down inside potentially, just causing Thunder Snow to not show his form. That's why I want to go there. Obviously, there's a price at which Mendelssohn would be no value at all here. They created these bets with the idea that they'd be around even money to get that sports betting effect. I think when we're talking about who we're taking here, we're sort of making an assumption that idea will be at least somewhere around correct. So it could change, but for all those factors, that's the things that are pushing me into the Mendelssohn camp. We think he'll get away from there. We know he can run the 1.25 miles. I just think there's less chance for things to go completely wrong for him. Could be wrong. He could get cooked, but I'll take my chances.
I can't see myself getting involved with either of them. I guess if I had to make a pick, it'd probably be over Thunder Snow, which I feel bad doing that because I love Mendelssohn. But like I said, it's not a wager that I have particularly strong opinion in either way. I think both of them are going to be in a little bit tough in a spot like this. One last piece with Enable, Pete. Jonathan, obviously hop in real quick too. Any idea or any thought to the idea that I remember when I was down at the Preakness in 2015, I believe it was Dick Girardi I was speaking to, and he had said that
I had dinner with him tonight.
Did you?
Yeah.
Oh, awesome. I believe it was him, and if it wasn't, I apologize, but this it wasn't a bad thing. I think it was a sharp thing that he'd said. He said that his logic was the Kentucky Derby was the tightener for American Pharoah, where he needed a race, he needed fitness, and the Preakness and the Belmont were when he was going to go and really strut his stuff. Does that possibly apply to a horse like Enable, where the Arc, she's just that good that she actually went and got the job done, but that was the race to get her tight, and now perhaps on Saturday we see her go out there and put on a show?
I think she can move forward, absolutely. I was encouraged by how she got over the ground. I mean, it's one of the for an old school horseman, the hands she's in, the idea that she'd run a peak race in her third off the layoff. That's how I'm seeing this. Other very sharp horse players have suggested that, the Arc might have been taxing and she could react to it. From having seen her in the flesh, I think it's going to go the other way. I'm going with my first gut here, which is that she's going to be ready to fire a big bullet and knock that Arc stat out of the water once and for all.
She's without question the superstar. What do you think, JK?
No, same thing. I agree. I mean, I think she either runs the same race or she runs a better one, and either one of those scenarios is good enough to win against this bunch, right? There's no Highland Reels here. There's no horses like that. There's no Found. There's no Golden Horn. I guess there is a Found and a Golden Horn, and it looks like Enable, but there's no. We don't have those stars in here that could potentially improve enough to give her a fight.
Well, where Pete and I are recording this from, we've got about 5 minutes left in the month of October. Jonathan, you're going on 11 o'clock in Texas?
10:54. That's right.
Okay, so you're getting ready to turn over.
Too.
What was that?
Got a busy day tomorrow. I'm flying back, and Dad's Day, and I got a boat tomorrow. I got a lot going on.
I would say, before we button this thing up, is there one sort of just last comment to throw out there for any of these 14 races that we've covered on either of these parts of this joint podcast?
I have one point to make. You want to go first, JK?
Yeah, I have a weird thought, and I haven't handicapped the race fully, but I'll tell you this. The favorite, they don't usually have this in the Breeders' Cup, but the famous Get Out race, right? The last race at after Derby. They actually have two of them after Derby. Prize to Perfection, who's a half to Miss Temple City, who's run 20 times in her life, and all of them have been on the turf. Jim Cassidy decided to throw her on the plane and run her in a dirt race. And she's 20-1 on the morning line. She might not be good enough, but she's surely interesting in this spot.
Pete, what do you got?
I just want to say, everything JK said about how when they get a ton of rain here, the inside can bog down is true. I just wouldn't. I'd want to see some evidence of that before I acted on it too much. Maybe you can be a little bit speculative about it, but it's not always that way when it rains, and it's not going to be raining as much. Even though it's been raining all day and going to rain some into tomorrow, it's still not going to be like the cumulative amount of rain that they had, for example, like at the Derby this year when it really bogged down. I would just say keep an open mind about all the bias stuff that's going on. Sometimes you see they drop the turf rail like they're going to do, and those inside paths are better. So just keep an open mind. It's going to be a good thing to yap about on Twitter. It's not a fait accompli that it's going to be that way, but I mean it's a very smart thing to point out, and it should be in the back of your minds at least.
Pete, and I think you could probably throw the Mike Maloney quote about dancing that was in the book.
Yes, bias, something to the effect of bias can be a tricky game, and if you're gonna dance with bias, you best do so on your toes.
Gentlemen, this is always one of my favorite little podcasts of the year. Doing this with you guys again. This is the joint DRF Players Podcast. Matt Bernie, your show Breeders' Cup Special. This is the second part. If you haven't heard the first part, head on over. You can find that on video.drf.com. You can find it on YouTube. You can find it on all the sort of places that you listen to podcasts, whether it's Apple Podcasts or iTunes or whatever else it may be. Their Twitter handles, Peter Thomas Fornatale is at Looms Boldly, Jonathan Kinchin's at UT Big Hair. I am at Bernier_Matt. Again, a little more self-promo. The Betting the Breeders' Cup show will be on NBCSN Thursday, and then I believe twice on Friday before Breeders' Cup coverage kicks off. You'll be able to see and hear all of us all over the place all weekend. I believe, JK, you're doing the Players' show at some point. PTF, are you going to hop on there at all?
I have not been invited. Sniff, sniff. TV's Matt Bernier and now TV's Jonathan Kinchin. If you're in the UK, which some of our listeners are, I do believe I'm going to be part of some of the At the Races coverage. So that will be fun, and who knows, maybe somebody will be a late scratch and I'll end up on the Players show with you big shots.
We'll wait and see what happens. We're 2 minutes to midnight here on Halloween evening. If you couldn't tell, I'm starting to fade at this point. We all need a little bit of rest because here we are. We're finally at the point. We've been building up to it for weeks and weeks and weeks on end. We're finally here. Breeders' Cup 2018 for Jonathan Kinchin, for Peter Thomas Fornatale, the fellas at the Players Podcast. Matt Bernier here, at Bernier_Matt on Twitter. Pete, why don't you start off here, wrap up the Breeders' Cup podcast?
May you win all your photos.